And so it is. And I thank everyone for being with us today. And as I said at the beginning, I'm starting with something that, of course, is near and dear to my heart, having been sick here for a couple of weeks. And as a metaphysician, we understand that the things that take place in our lives are a reflection of what's going on in our consciousness. And what happens, excuse me, when we get sick is we can't help but going into metaphysical guilt and beating ourselves up and saying, what in the world was I thinking? And why aren't I getting better quicker, and all those kind of things. And those are natural, and those are good thoughts to have, because they lead us back to questioning. They lead us back to the basics, if you will. And it happens to all of us, and it's a good topic to explore, because it's something that we go through as human beings. So we want to talk today about the power of prayer to heal, about physical healing through the activity of spiritual mind treatment, affirmative prayer. And we want to talk about how that unfolds in our lives, and why it's important to us as individuals, why it's important to us as a teaching movement, why it's important to us in our spiritual growth. So what we want to look at first, we want to start, and we want to recognize Dr. Holmes in the chapter on physical perfection. He starts out by saying, there's no doubt that people of all times and places, of all ages, have been healed through the power of prayer. And you have to ask yourself, well, do you really believe that? Is that really so? Do I really believe that? And that's a valid question. That's a good question. We have to ask ourselves, has anyone ever been healed by prayer? And if you have any doubt, go explore, go look at the different works, at the different things that have been documented. Now you're going to find things when you start looking that you're going to read and say, well, I don't know that person was healed by prayer. I don't know, that the claims that people are making in this story are true. And you'll find others that you'll look at and say, well, I don't understand that there's another explanation. I don't understand, that there's a reason why what I'm reading here is not true. A good reference, if you want a scientific reference, there's a very good book by Dr. Dean Radin, R-A-D-I-N, and it's called The Conscious Universe. And Dr. Radin starts to look at the experiments of prayer and healing, and he starts to look at them the same way that scientists would look at the effectiveness, for example, of aspirin in preventing heart attacks. Excuse me. What Dr. Radin says is that when doctors were trying to determine if giving people an aspirin a day, an 80 milligram aspirin a day, was effective in preventing a second heart attack, they came to the realization that yes, it was effective, and they needed to stop the trial and start prescribing the medicine. And the reason they needed to do that was that they felt that it would be unethical to withhold the treatment when they knew that it had an effect, that it was producing an effect. And they do this by statistical analysis. So what Dr. Radin did was he went through and he tried to gather together what evidence he could for different experiments that were made over the years that had to do with the interaction of consciousness and circumstances, if you will. Physical healing, the interacting of human consciousness with random number machines, and all of those sorts of things, to see if there was a correlation between human consciousness and physical stuff, if you will. And according to what he wrote in the book The Conscious Universe, that the statistical evidence for the ability of consciousness, of prayer, to have an impact on healing showed that it was 10 times more effective than an aspirin was in preventing a second heart attack. And he raised the question, of course, well, if this is so, if these numbers are correct and if his analysis is correct, if this is so, then why isn't modern medicine kind of promoting to people or telling people of the importance of their consciousness, the importance of prayer? Of course, if you call it prayer, they won't do it. But if you talk about attitude and consciousness and those things as being more effective in the healing process than some of the medicines, then it would seem that, from his conclusion, it would seem that that medicine has an obligation to inform people of this. But the important thing from our point of view is that Dr. Radin has gone through and has given example after example after example to kind of demonstrate that yes, there is in fact an interaction between our consciousness and our physical experience, and not just our own physical experience, but the physical experience of things around us, of stuff around us. As I say, random number generators and those kind of things that we're not physically attached to. So Dr. Holmes tells us to consider. Oh, one other thing about physical healing. I saw a program on TV one time about Lourdes, the shrine in France, which in the Catholic tradition is kind of venerated as a place where the Virgin Mary appeared to some children there. And I remember it because my dad was there during the Second World War, and he brought home a little bottle of water from the springs. And the people in that tradition, they believe that there's power in the water, the holy water, and they take that water. If they can't be there to physically touch the water, then what they do is they get a bottle of water and they take it back home and they give it to someone who's sick, with a belief, remind you, an intention that there is something associated with that water that will heal. And the story that we were watching kind of went into, examining the cases there, because there's a board of people who examine when somebody says, well, I went to Lourdes and I had a healing, and there's a board of people who examine it and say, well, are there any other explanations for this healing of this person? And there was a gentleman who was a soldier in the Italian army, and he was discharged because he had an incurable disease, and they felt that he only had like a year to live. And I think they called it tuberculosis of the hip bone, and of course I had never heard of anything like that. But they showed the X-rays, and if you looked at the X-rays, where there would normally be a pelvis and a hip and a ball and a socket and all those things, there was just this mush, there was just this kind of gel or a cloud on the X-ray. And he wanted to see Lourdes before he died, and he said he wasn't going there because he believed in healing, or he necessarily wanted a healing, or to pray for healing. He was just simply going there because he wanted to see Lourdes before he died. And he went there, and then he went back home, and the year came and the year went, and he didn't die. So he went back to the doctors and he said, what's going on here? And they examined him again. And whatever the condition was that he had before, it was gone. It was gone, and they showed an after X-ray. And I'm assuming that nobody doctored the X-rays for the purpose of the TV show and those kind of things. But afterwards, excuse me, the bones were reformed. They were there. And they kind of offered that as an example of a spontaneous healing. Now, he personally wasn't there praying for healing, but there were a lot of people there who were praying for healing. There were a lot of people there who believed in healing, and they believed in the power of prayer to heal. So we want to look at these things, and we want to say that from the beginning of time, before there were doctors, there were shamans, there were people who would heal through prayer, and there are still people in primitive societies today, in the Philippines, for example, where there are people who their position in the tribe is that they are the healer. When somebody is sick, they go to this person, and this person will perform ritual or prayer or whatever the custom may be. I remember seeing one such documentary where the man who produced it lived in America and had been educated in our colleges, but his mother still lived in a tribe that was pretty much Stone Age, and she was the healer. And they went back to visit her and to film her work, and she had like a little hut, and the people who were sick would be carried to her, or they would come to her. And she had a little stick. It was about 18 inches long and maybe a half inch, 3/4 of an inch in diameter, a little tree limb. And she held it almost like you would expect someone to hold a pool cue. And she would find out what area of the body the person had a complaint with, and she would, she had smoke and herbs and all kinds of things, and she would go around and then she would take the stick and she would poke them where it hurt. And they would report that they got better. So the man who who was doing the interview, there was a man who was with the producer, and he asked, through the translator, he said, how is it that the stick has magical powers to heal? And the woman laughed. She just laughed, and she says, no, don't be silly. She says, sticks don't have magical powers. Sticks can't heal. And they said, well, what is it that heals? And she says, it's the intention. It's the intention to heal and the intention to be healed. And this was a woman who had no education to our standards of education, but she understood the role of intention. She understood the power of belief. And this is what Dr. Holmes is telling us about. If we look at healing throughout the ages, there's been an awareness, a recognition that it is our mental outlook, it is our attention, it is our intention that allows us to experience that which we call healing. Now, in our own country, in America, what had happened here in the early 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, around the time of the American Revolution. Of course, we understand that as a result of the Revolution, the Americans had a spirit of independence, that they didn't have to do things the old way. And that included religion. They didn't have to believe in the old way. Our frontiers were expanding faster than the clergy could keep up with it. So in many cases, people were going out and settling in areas where there was no established religion. There was no formal church like they had known. It wasn't like when the Pilgrims came. The clergy came and kind of set up the government for them and all that. As these people were kind of moving west as fast as they could. But at that time in our country, what was going on is that the clergy were usually the most educated or the best educated people in the community. And they were also the doctors. So when people got sick, they went to their priest or their minister for healing, for healing through medicine. And if that medicine didn't work, or if that healing didn't work, if that person was left with a situation where, they had to seek out an alternative or die, the alternative that they sought out was frequently someone who had a different concept of God, a different belief about God, a different way of thinking. And when people went to these alternative healers and they were healed, and Dr. Bales tells us, consider that, some people go to chiropractors, some people go to osteopaths, some people go to surgeons, and some people go to internal medicine doctors, and all report healing, that there's an underlying principle of healing that works through all of these modalities. And the same thing was going on then, and as these people would go to the alternative healers and they would experience a healing, then they would want to know more. Well, how did that work and why did that work? And this is how New Thought spread in this country. Quimby, P.P. Quimby in Maine is kind of often considered like ground zero for the growth of New Thought in the United States. And his experience started with a healing. And one of his students was Mary Baker Eddy. She had a healing. Or one of his clients was Mary Baker Eddy. She had a healing. And she went on to found Christian Science. Mary Baker Eddy had an influence on Emma Curtis Hopkins, and Emma Curtis Hopkins taught about healing. And some of her students were giving lectures, and the Fillmores of Unity attended. And they had healings. So there's something about this physical response, this response of the body to the condition of the mind, to the condition of our thoughts, of our beliefs. There's something there that gets people's attention. You can't deny that something happened. And once that something happens, once people start to experience that, then they want to know more. Why is it so? How could this be? And of course, the different idea of God that we're talking about when you come into the New Thought movement is that some of the old traditions taught people that, well, maybe God wants you to be sick, or maybe God sent you the sickness as a test or as a punishment, and maybe you should just accept your sickness as a blessing and just kind of suffer with grace and all those kind of things. And when they come into New Thought, all of that was kind of dispelled. All of that was kind of denied, that God itself could not send sickness or suffering to any one of us because we are part of it, and it could not send sickness or suffering to itself. It can't be against itself. It is for itself. It doesn't know that we need to know anything, so it doesn't need to test us. It is not aware of our transgressions because what it knows it is. If it were aware of our transgressions, it would be our transgressions. So it's not punishing us, So what we come to realize is that the perfection of God already is. Let me use the example of the sun. The sun already is. The sunlight is there. And you and I don't have to make the sunlight. We couldn't live without it, but we don't have to make it. But we can choose what kind of sunglasses we put on. We can put on the proverbial rose-colored glasses and we can see the world as being a peaceful and a happy place, or we can put on different glasses. And it makes no difference to the sun what color glasses we put on. It makes no difference to the sun what experience we are having as a result of the glasses that we chose to put on, or the filters with which we choose to see the perfection that is already there. It is totally unaffected by that experience that we are having. It doesn't know that we're suffering. It only knows that we're expressing life. Now, the degree to which we're expressing life is our choice. And if we choose to restrict, not voluntarily, but kind of through our subconscious thoughts, but if we through our mental attitude, if we in effect choose to have a limited expression of life, then that's what we have. But life itself is not affected by it. If we choose to limit the power of the sunlight through pulling down the window shades or putting on dark glasses, the sun is not affected by it. Excuse me. So what we come to realize then is that the perfection of God is already there. That which knows perfect health, that which can create an entire human fetus out of two tiny cells, one from mom and one from dad. And it can oversee the growth and the development of that fetus as cells multiply and divide and multiply and divide. And some become bone and some become eyes. The same cells, some become bone and some become eyes. What guides them on their way? And Dr. Bales kind of talks about this in his book, Your Mind Can Heal You. He says, just think about how miraculous it is that these two tiny cells, one from mom and one from dad, multiply, divide, specialize, grow, put together intricate systems, put together organs, put together this beautiful, beautiful little body. And he says to think that the intelligence that does that would abandon us when we are born, kind of kick us out of our mother's womb into the world and say, okay, now you're on your own. He says that's impossible. That intelligence is still here with us. That perfection is still here with us. And it is ready, willing, and able to express itself as us. But it can only do so according to its own law. And that law is that it is done unto us according to our belief. So we recognize that we are some part of the divine. And if we stop and think about how the divine creates, how does God create, we have to understand that you and I, as individualized expressions of God, we reenact that, Dr. Holmes tells us. We reenact on our level, in our place, in our time, we reenact what goes on at the divine level. So we think in the beginning we have this unformed stuff, if you will. In Genesis it tells us in the beginning was the chaos and nothing was formed, and things just weren't like they are now. Something happened. Something moved to organize all this stuff. Right? It says, Spirit moved upon the face of the waters. The divine used its willpower. It made a decision. And it said, let there be. It spoke its word. Let there be. Let there be stars and planets, and let there be animals of every kind, and let there be human beings, and let there be water, and let there be earth. And we're told, metaphorically, we're told through this teaching story, what we're being told is that everything that we see around us, all of the material things that we see around us, are the unformed stuff and substance and energy of God that has taken a very specific form at a very specific place in time for a very specific purpose, but it has done so under the direction of the divine mind, under the direction of the intention of God, the declaration of God, the let it be of God. So there was a decision that was made. There was a will. There was a conscious decision on the part of the divine mind that said, there will be, let there be. And then something that is a part of the divine itself, but something that's acting as a blind force or a law. So think of gravity as a blind force. Gravity doesn't care what it's acting upon. It doesn't know. Gravity doesn't care if we hold a bag of gold out off of the Empire State Building or a bag of coal. If we release either one, they're both going to fall to the ground at exactly the same speed. Gravity doesn't care if we fall off the edge of the cliff, if we're a saint or a sinner. It doesn't matter. Gravity is going to act upon the mass of our bodies with blind force. So this creative power of the universe that we call the law of mind acts as a blind force. And Spirit said, let there be, and then this blind force knew what to do to make it so, but it never questions. It never said, well, are you sure you want that? Don't you want something else? Dr. Holmes gives us the equivalent of if we take a tomato seed out and stick it in the soil doesn't say back to us, are you sure you want tomatoes? Maybe you want cucumbers, and I'll give you cucumbers instead. The creative force is a blind force. It follows the involution. It is subjective in that it follows the decision that was made objectively. So the divine mind says, I shall have the experience of universes and galaxies and stars and planets and plants and animals, etc. And then there is this something, there is this force, there is this power. In traditional Christian theology, it is referred to as the Holy Spirit, the doer of the Word. Right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt amongst us. Something acted upon the Word, the intention, the desire, and then produced the physical equivalent of the mental declaration. And that is the very same power that operates still with us. It didn't stop. On the seventh day God rested. The power didn't stop working. But there was a new starting place within that power. There was a new creative center within that power, which is you and I. And we have been created to use that power. We cannot stop it from interacting with us, no more than we can stop gravity from interacting with us. And that power responds to us according to our belief. So what Dr. Holmes tells us then is if we look around, we can see that there have always been times when people were healed through the power of prayer, and there have been times when people have not been healed through the power of prayer. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that? Does that mean that, sometimes the power works and sometimes the power doesn't work? And what he tells us is no. What it means is that sometimes individuals cooperate fully and completely and properly, if you want to call it that, with the power, and at other times we don't. And we get back into our experience of life the perfect outpicturing of our mental equivalent. And what he tells us then is really what we want to consider our life to be, is our life is like this grand experiment, this joyous adventure where what we are doing is paying attention to what we're paying attention to and making sure that we are keeping our thoughts aligned with the perfection as it is, so that we're not putting on dark sunglasses to block the light, that instead what we are doing is allowing the fullness of that light to flow through us. So the prayer then is always an uplifting of consciousness, if you will. It's I think it was Joel Goldsmith talked about it. If you go into a building at street level and you have an appointment on a 27th floor, you get on the elevator and you go up to the 27th floor. You don't stand on the elevator while the 27th floor comes down to you. And what we're doing in our affirmative prayer, what the purpose of our affirmative prayer is to set in motion that power that can lift our consciousness up. The very act of praying, the very act of treating our consciousness, is uplifting our consciousness. But after we do that, what we're doing is we are stating that we believe that there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. And our prayer is our belief, and that power is acting upon that prayer, and it continues to produce whatever change or changes as needs must be for the uplifting of our consciousness. So this is very important. We're not trying to make God create anything or do anything that it hasn't already done. What we are doing is we are cooperating with a power of the universe for the purpose of producing within our own consciousness an avenue through which the answered prayer, the demonstration, can be made. So I see sometimes people say, well, when you're praying, aren't you telling God what to do? If you think you need to pray, aren't you saying that God has made a mistake? And now you're telling God how to correct his or her mistake. And it depends on what you consider prayer to be. In some traditions, if you stop and think about what prayer might be, yeah, that might be a fair criticism. Are people thinking that God is kind of unaware of what's going on, unaware of what needs to be done, so I need to tell God? But that's not the way that we are coming at prayer. We're coming at prayer, that prayer is an activity that sets in motion a change of our own consciousness, an uplifting of our own consciousness. And once our consciousness is changed, then a complete healing takes effect. So you can see at times that people are sick and they have one set of symptoms and they get over that set of symptoms and they go on and they have another set of symptoms and then they have another set of symptoms and then another and then another. And what Dr. Holmes tells us is until our consciousness has changed, until our mental conditions have been healed, why then there's no permanent cure. We just move from one sickness to another to another. So what we want to do and what we are doing in our spiritual practice, coming at this from the spiritual level, is we are working in our prayer life, in our treatment, in our meditation, in our affirmations, in our visualizations. What we are doing is working to, first of all, use willpower properly. You don't try to force healing on yourself or on anybody else. You're not trying to scrunch up your eyes and send mental power anywhere or send thoughts anywhere. There's nowhere for them to go. There's only one. There's only one place, and we are all in it, all at the same time. Right? This is why I can pray for you, you can pray for me, and the healing will result, because we're all part of the same whole. We are all one. So we're not using willpower to try to overcome or to fight or to beat down the conditions of the world. What we are doing is using willpower to choose that which we would have. That is the proper use of willpower. So when you see these billboards along the highway that says help fight this or help fight that or help fight the other thing, what they're doing is they are giving power to that which they are fighting. What we want to do is accept the perfection that is. We don't want to fight anything. There's nothing to fight. There's nothing real. There's nothing that has a power to sustain itself to fight. There's only an incorrect idea to be dissolved, and we dissolve it by accepting the truth. You would say, for example, darkness in a room is the result of the light having been closed off. You don't fight darkness. You open the blind. You light the candle. You turn on the light. And that's what we're talking about doing here. So what we want to do is we want to examine ourselves and say, well, what am I deciding? What have I been deciding? Am I deciding on health? Am I deciding on wholeness? Am I deciding on perfection? And then Dr. Holmes asks us to consider, well, are we focusing our attention on that? Are we concentrating on that? Now we want to consider what concentration is. Concentration, again, is not scrunching up our eyes and trying to force ourselves or all those things. Concentration is, what do you give your attention to? I know everybody does it. You become interested in something that's new to you, something that you had never heard of before. And you give it your attention. You start to do research. You read books about it. You watch movies about it. You talk to people about it. You may find other people who are interested in it, and you get together, whether it be in person, excuse me, or in chat rooms on the internet, and you discuss it. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? You've given your attention to it. You're concentrating on it. Your mind is there with it. Your mind is not flittering all over the place, the monkey mind or the little grasshopper mind. But your mind is there and it is focused. So the willpower we use to choose what we would have, and then we put our concentration, we put our attention to it, we stay with it, and we imagine it. See, we start to use imagination, and this is where the power of imagination becomes so powerful. Remember, I think it was Emile Coué who said, when imagination and will are in conflict, the imagination will win every time. We start to imagine ourselves. We start to see ourselves. We start to get into the demonstration of starting to see ourselves acting as if. We start to see ourselves acting in a perfectly healthy way. Now, as we do that, then this power that responds to us according to our belief, the power that brought the entire universe into expression, why then that power starts to work through that image that we have given to it, our intention and our attention. And the power starts to move through that to produce further change or changes in our consciousness, to remove and to dilute, if you will, the erroneous ideas that we have or that we have had, to produce within us a clean channel or an avenue of perfect health, so that the perfect health may start to unfold through us. So the idea of perfect health and perfect healing is that what we're doing is aligning our consciousness up with that which already is, the perfection of God. And then, of course, excuse me, we have to ask ourselves, well, why is it that I get sick? Sometimes I get sick. And why is it that sometimes if I get sick, I don't heal as quick as I think I should heal? And the answer lies in what we just talked about. What are we giving our attention to? What is our intention? Are we thinking this day about experiencing the day in perfect health? And are we allowing our attention to stay on all of the perfection, the perfect health around us? Gratitude is a great practice for that. Can I spend the day in gratitude, blessing everything around me? Can I bless every aspect of the perfect health of my body? If I start to think about everything that's working okay, everything that's working just fine, that which we bless multiplies. But what we tend to do as human beings, if something's not working, we give all of our attention to that, right? And we stay with it all day long. Well, why do I have this pain? Oh, my goodness, my aching back or whatever it might be. And what we want to do is we want to shift our attention. We want to shift our focus, our concentration. We want to shift it over to the idea that the perfection of God is here, is with us. And it is unfolding through and as us now. Now, with regard to the amount of time it takes, there's no time in the mind of God. The action of God is instantaneous. But there may be time involved in our letting go of the old ideas. What can be cured? Is there any such thing as an incurable disease? And Dr. Holmes' answer to that was no. There is no incurable disease. Right? That which brings energy into form can create any form that it wants, can do anything. But there may be incurable people. And I'll tell you right now, different teachers that you read, you'll find a disagreement on that. Some like Emma Curtis Hopkins would say, don't ever put that into mind, because you never want to start with the idea, well, this idea is incurable. But Dr. Holmes said that he believed that people could not be cured of an idea that they did not want to let go of. So if we refuse to let go of whatever the idea or ideas are that are the mental cause of our dis-ease. Remember, dis-ease is lack of ease. Right? It means something is not there. The ease is not there. Dis-ease is not cause unto itself. It is a lack of something else. So we have mental conditions. We're not aware of what they are, but we do have mental conditions that are the cause of the physical conditions. And if we are unwilling and unable to let go easily and quickly, well, then there may be from our point of view, there may be a period of time that the healing takes place. And this is why we continue to do our treatment. Dr. Holmes said there's only one treatment to give for however many times we have to give it. That each time we are treating, what we are doing is we are building consciousness. We are sometimes, we are peeling away the layers of the onion. If you stay with something long enough, and that's another reason why we don't always, get well, is that our attention moves to something else. But if we stay with something long enough, if you take a condition and you try to treat for it every day for 30 days, or until it's gone, and Dr. Holmes said that you should do your treatment until it's gone. Stay with it until it's gone. That what you find is that over that period of time, your treatment changes. You start to treat for different aspects of the issue. In other words, as the old ideas start to give way, you become aware of intuitively of other things to treat for, of other aspects of consciousness associated with that condition, and you start to treat for them. Dr. William Hornaday was an associate, a co-pastor with Ernest Holmes out in California, and I saw a tape recording, a videotape of a talk that Dr. Hornaday gave very late in his life, very near the end of his life, and he was talking about a time when excuse me, he was talking about a time when he was very ill. Something was wrong with his back, and he actually lost the ability to walk, and he had to use a wheelchair to move, to get around. And he continued to do his Sunday talks, and he would speak while sitting in the wheelchair. And he said he would speak, and he would be talking about perfection, and he would be talking about the law of God, and he would be talking about how everything we experience is a result of our consciousness. And he says, and people would get up and leave. People would get up and leave because they would judge by appearances. They would look at him sitting in that wheelchair, and they would say, what this guy's telling us is it can't be true, or he doesn't know what he's talking about. They expected, because he understood the law of mind and he knew about it, they expected that he should never have any symptoms of anything other than perfection in his life. And Dr. Hornaday said he continued to speak, even though the church was losing attendance and people were going other places. He continued to speak because he knew that the power was working. He knew the immutability of the law. He knew that it had to be working, and that it was in fact unfolding. And he knew that while he may not be able to get out of that wheelchair that particular day, he knew that the healing process, now the process being in his own mind, not the process in God's mind. Right? There's no sense of time in God's mind. But he knew that his healing was occurring. And the day that I saw him speak, he danced from one side of the stage to the other. And he said, I don't know where all the people are who left the church now. He said, but I wish they could see me dance. Sometimes it takes time for our human consciousness to heal. But we need to keep our attention and our intention focused on what we want. So I think what happens to us is sometimes in life we get busy, and our mind and our attention gets scattered, and we get focused on all different things, and we don't necessarily stop to bless the perfection and the health that we already have. the wealth that we already have, the loving relationships that we already have, the fulfilling activities that we already have, and the spiritual practice that lets us experience the very presence of God. And we get busy and our minds get scattered. And what happens to us when our minds get scattered and we no longer take conscious control, if you will, of our lives? We become subject to the law of averages. We become subject to life as it is. We become that statistic that gets the cold or gets the flu or whatever it may be. In other words, we start to function again at the level of race consciousness, the human race. And that race consciousness believes in the necessity of sickness and in colds and in suffering and in disease. So what Dr. Holmes tells us then is that the purpose of treatment is to insulate, isolate, and inoculate our consciousness from the race consciousness, from the belief in the necessity of sickness. And that by doing so, by using our willpower, our concentration, and our imagination properly in the right sequence, that what we can do is keep ourselves attuned to the very power that would heal us, that would express through us perfectly. So I invite everyone then, whatever the area might be. Now, we talked a lot about physical health today, but I want to make sure that everybody understands that this power that we're talking about knows no difference between the physical health, the financial health, the emotional health, relationship health, fulfilling activity health. It's one power that works through everything. It's probably easier for us to see it work when we see it in the physical, but it is the same power that works through everything. That which takes the unformed stuff and substance and energy of the universe and puts it into particular form for a particular purpose can make no distinction. That doesn't know or doesn't care, if you will, whether it is bringing that into experience as a perfectly healthy cell in our bodies or a perfectly healthy relationship in our lives. So pick an area of your life where you would like to see something change. Use your willpower to decide what that will be. Use your willpower to keep your attention focused. Not to scrunch up your eyes, as I said, and try to force it, but deliberately choose and ask yourselves, periodically during the day, ask yourself, what am I choosing right now? Am I choosing that which I wish to experience, or am I choosing to keep my attention on everything that tells me why it won't work? You might want to keep the TV turned off for a week or so. Keep your mind on what you want and off the things you don't want. Emmett Fox said that all you need to do is change your mind and keep it changed. Emma Curtis Hopkins says all you have to do is tell the truth about God until it shows up in your life. And I like Emma's. It seems a little bit more colorful to me. Florence Scovel Shinn said it's a game of boomerangs. What you toss out, you're going to get back. Jesus said you cast your bread upon the waters and it'll come back to you. And Isaiah said, my word shall not return unto me void. You and I are an individualized expression of that creative power that made the universe out of itself. It made the universe out of itself through a conscious act of will, of volition, of choosing, of deciding, and of allowing that part of itself that functions as blind force or law, as we call the law of mind, to do its work for the unfoldment. That is what we're part of. We can't change that. That is what we're part of. The only choice we have is to consciously work with it or not. If not, then we are allowing ourselves to be subject to the race consciousness, to the law of averages. And if so, then we start to break ourselves out of that mold of the law of averages. We start to break ourselves into an experience that is more reflective of that which we have chosen and that which we have given our attention and our imagination to. So the secret of life then is not hard to explain. The actual practice requires some discipline on our part, some willingness to become more aware of what it is that we have given our intention and our attention to. Awareness of what is truly going on in our experience in life, and our willingness to change if what is going on is not what we really want to have. So choose an area you'd like to work on. Give your attention to it. Give your intention to it. Think about how whatever it is relates to God. And allow that law to do its work. And constantly bless the health that you have. Constantly bless the goodness around you. Constantly acknowledge that the law of mind is working on your behalf in your life. And watch for the results. Remember, we reenact what goes on in the universe. We reenact here. The universe responds to the mind of God. Your universe responds to the mind of God operating through you. But you must choose. You must choose what you will have and keep your mind on that. Imagine it, see it, feel it, expect it, and the law will do the rest. And so it is.